Alright everyone, welcome to week 11 and also of Advanced Digital, the second video. We're talking about Weaverbird. Now we've seen the relaxation stuff, and actually right now I'm gonna just show you two or three examples that are more extreme, that kind of show some of the applications of Weaverbird by itself. Now the first one we're going to look at is this one, the relaxed lattice structure example. It's the land shelving example. So there's a Rhino file and a Grasshopper file that's provided to you. Should look like this. And this was actually one that was a definition that was done by these guys, Live Architecture Network, a while ago, a long time ago actually, 2010, right? So that's like 6 years ago at this point. But it's actually a pretty good example in terms of showing you how you can go from a simple B-rep geometry into something like this to get this result in the end, which could be a stool or anything else that you can imagine. Okay, so as you can see, my input was actually a loft like this, and actually specifically, you know, it was a loft that was done so you know that you're going to get uneven edges because it's going from a 4-sided to a 6-sided or 5-sided pentagon. And so actually the sort of original lines probably were reoriented. But as you can see in this sort of result, one of the sides had to kind of be split into to accommodate for that, right? Okay. So that is the original B-rep that was input into here. Now, what I'm showing here is just the simple stuff that kind of illustrates how it works. But essentially, it's taking that sort of B-rep outline, and I can actually make this original B-rep outline, and using these to kind of both give it an inner thickness, right? But also an outer sort of thickness as well. Okay, so these are the parameters that are actually kind of controlling the sort of end result and how thick, right? Let's say the members are. Right? So all of this more or less is kind of taking that B-rep framework and sort of transforming it or redrawing it, right, to get a sort of solid B-rep framework like this that has thickness that they're able to offset. Filtering out coincident faces, so they're just kind of deleting out the faces that are inside that are overlapping or sharing the same faces. And then it's basically essentially joined into this whole one poly surface. Now this one poly surface is then what's taken into the mesh component, just like before, with some custom mesh settings, which is the same place. Mesh utilities. Instead of these sort of quality and speed presets, it's actually the custom setting panel where you can actually put in individual values for all these things. And then, essentially, just like before, pushed into let me hide this. Push it into a Weaverbird loop component. And there's a lot of stuff overlapping in here right now. So let me hide all this. Right. So that's the Weaverbird loop component that we have been looking at before. And essentially instead of what we're kind of playing around with earlier, there were just like, single faces or planes. Surfaces that were not closed. This is actually a closed polysurface geometry, right? That's been meshed and then essentially put into the Weaverbird loop component to get this sort of result. And as you can see, as I sort of modify or play with these offset figures, it changes the thickness, the porosity of the elements, that sort of stuff. Yeah. Okay. So conceptually, this just kind of shows you how you can kind of take a simple line framework and work with it is to get a poly surface framework, right? A thickened poly surface framework. You can't have any insides, right? It has to be a sort of joined poly surface um, that's then meshed, and then you use the Weaverbird loop component to relax it. Okay, so that one's actually pretty simple, at least conceptually. All right, the next one we're looking at is this one, what I call the Voronoi ball. It's the same basic concept, except this one can actually be a little bit more clear. It's not as like a huge of a definition, although some of the steps are a little bit fancier. So take a look at this. There's also the grasshopper file that you can open. So I'm just going to switch over to it. Okay. Now this is going to show up at the 000. There might not be anything at first, or there might be something there like that. So one of the things, if you're not sure where things are, hover over, let's say one of these, like this is the sort of end component, the last one in the series, where your output should be. Press the space bar to get the radio manual, right? And then this, whoops, you have to kind of activate it. Press over it, and use this to zoom in, and in the Rhino viewport, it will zoom in you into that where this component is. Okay, so I hit it because I want to show you in sort of step by step what this does. So this is a sphere, obviously, and you can kind of change the radius of the sphere if you want. I'll keep it at 5, just because changing things here is going to be a little bit heavy, because there's so much calculation being done downstream. For this sphere, we did a populate geometry. So vector grid populate geometry. So we're populating a generic geometry with points, and there's what, 50 points here. Okay, I'm finding its bounding box and pushing this into a 3D Voronoi component, right? So right now I have a sort of 3D Voronoi like this, using the bounding box of the sphere. And what I'm trying to do is essentially basically intersect the sphere with the Voronoi cells, right? So I'm basically kind of finding the outlines on the sphere surface, the spherical surface, the sort of Voronoi cell outlines. And that's what I'm using here. This is a BRUP intersection. It's under int, somewhere here. Shape. Physical BRUP, right? Solve intersection events for 2 BRUPs. So one of the BRUPs is the sphere itself. The other BRUP is all the Voronoi cells. So if there is any cell that's intersecting with the spherical surface, then it's going to show me the outline. So what you get is this. Okay, so this is a sort of cellular framework that's derived like from both the spherical surface, right? These are all on the surface. So it's a combination of that and this. Okay, easy enough to understand. This continuity, if you're kind of wondering where this is, curve analysis, generally, right here, finds all discontinuities along a curve. So what that means is like it's basically looking for any breaks or any kinks in the curves. So you'll see this basically correlates to all the vertices on the curves. Okay, it says wherever it turns, there's a point. What does this get me? This gives me a way to both redraw using these points as a straight polyline network, all of the cells. Because if you think about the original, which is the red, is all curved, right? They're like curving. They correlate to the spherical surface. I want to straighten them out, so I'm just using that to kind of redraw, so I know that these are all straight sections. Okay. I'm closing them, so this is set to true. Closed polyline is set to true. And also, I'm actually taking all the points and averaging them. And this is a sort of nifty part of the average component, which is under math. Here, let's math utility. Right there, average. Solve the arithmetic average for a set of items. But it actually also works on points or point coordinates, and will give you the averaged out point coordinate, which in this case would actually be our area centroids. The area centroids for all of these cells, essentially. Okay, so I have polylines, straight polyline sections of the sort of cellular network. I have the average points of each face, are essentially the area centroid of each face. Obviously, we can scale these, right, by using the area centroid. So I'm scaling these up or down, you know, a certain amount. I think it was set to 0.8 earlier. So we're just scaling these to get an offset. Okay. And I'm hiding these things as I go, just so like it doesn't get too sort of messy or complicated. But essentially what I'm doing here is I'm using the loft command to loft between this outer frame and our scaled or offset frames to get a lofted surface that looks like this. Okay, right. So there's a similarity between here and, if you remember the previous Weaverbird command, the picture frame, right, or mesh window, either of these. The picture frame, which basically kind of takes any of the sort of mesh outlines and offsets them inwards and basically does this, right? So you see this sort of set of operations is basically kind of similar to the conceptually to the idea of the Weaverbird picture frame. So you could actually kind of do this if out of a mesh network, if that was what you had. Okay. Loft, joining the lofts all together, and then deconstructing the BREP because I want the faces of the BREP. And then this is a kind of different way of doing this. Instead of essentially meshing a whole BREP, which is actually a little bit harder to control, I'm deconstructing the whole thing down into its individual faces, which here I know these individual faces are all quads, right? They're all four-sided. There's no weird stuff going on. They're all just like some kind of trapezoid, basically. Okay. So instead of that, I'm using this, the mesh surface, right, component, which is exactly this. And I'm actually meshing it with a UV subdivision of 1 by 1, which makes the mesh really simple. The mesh doesn't have any subdivisions in it. It's just 1 by 1. Okay, so these are basically quad faces that I'm creating this way. A few settings: allow faces to overhang, true, and equalize span length, false. Right. Now at the back end of this mesh component, I am flattening it, which means after flattening it, it becomes one big list of meshes, right? Instead of what was originally a lot of sublists, different sublists, right, of faces that kind of comprise each sort of cell boundary, right? Now that it's compressed, then I'm joining it with the Weaverbird mesh join right here, That's where it is. So Weaverbird join meshes and weld returns a singular mesh object made out of a list of meshes, right? Mesh is lighter, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this was one big list of meshes. Now it's all joined into one mesh, hence one mesh right here as the output. So it's joined together. Okay? All right. So now there's only just two components left. This is the joined mesh, clean, nothing complicated, predictable. So Catmull Clark, WV Catmull Clark. You get somewhat of this, and you can kind of see how it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, right? Which kind of smooths a lot of these sort of edges out, creates a quad topology that works really well with this. All right, and then thicken, basically. So now we just start giving it a thickening offset to say how thick we want this to be. 0.3, 0.4, whatever, bake it. And you see this is a really, really clean mesh. Came out of that sphere and its intersection with a Voronoi diagram. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a Voronoi. It's just any sort of, as you can see, any sort of curve network that can kind of yield basically this sort of result, right? Whether it's open or closed, as long as it's sort of consistent in its points that you can kind of work with to get essentially to be able to get a UV mesh or a mesh framework that's like this will work. And so it's a little bit more flexible than the previous example that was done a while ago. This one is a little bit more flexible and can work with a wider variety of conditions. Okay. Now this last example, what that we'll look at really briefly is actually one that will require a different component or a user component that you can download. It's this. It's called the Mesh Edit Tools. It extends Grasshopper's ability to work with meshes. It's on Food for Rhino. Can download it. Same thing. Go to your Grasshopper file, special folders, components folder, and just copy paste it in. So it's this Grasshopper assembly, mesh edit, and as always, you'll have to unload Grasshopper and reload it. So Grasshopper unload plugin, GH, open it again. I believe they pop out somewhere here. Yeah, so you'll get some more options here in particular, but anyways, you will, in order to open this file, actually you will need to have that installed. Otherwise you will get an error. Okay, delete this. Alright, you have some really weird stuff here. But essentially, what's here is, okay, but you can see that this file is actually kind of made explicitly for making, well, crazy radial error. So all of these pull down menus are basically these options that are kind of controlled by this filter gate. And so I can change this initial starting geometry to, cube, weird prism stuff, pyramid, so these are just sort of different options. Let's stick with the sphere for now. And these actually just control which of these loops it goes through, so whether or not it links you to the loop subdivision or it links you to the Catmull-Clark subdivision, and obviously you can control subdivision level. Although I wouldn't do too many because it's already really kind of going crazy. So this one I like Catmull-Clark. You can kind of go down. These just control somewhat of the sort of thickness offsets of this method. Minimum, a little higher. Okay. And whenever you see one of these, just try it out, see what it does. Kind of go down. Same thing, Catmull-Clark or loop. You can see it changes the way the surface or the way this thing is subdivided, how many iterations. This loop generally works better with 2 subdivisions or higher. All this stuff basically kind of does preview color, different versions of it. So you can do a single solid color if you wanted to, and you can pick the color from here, or a texture, or a gradient, right, which you can kind of pick from here. Presets, you can do a different gradient. And then all in the end, this is just like basically coloring the mesh. And if you bake it, then you would get essentially the mesh colored and specified with whatever settings you kind of gave it. Yeah. So this actually very simply just like takes a lot of the sort of original Weaverbird presets, right? And then kind of works with them through a series of the different Weaverbird settings. So you see, Catmull-Clark, you see the carpet. There's a sort of point attractor thing here. Let me see what this is. To kind of control the color and the density. It's thickened, joined, all this stuff. So it's sort of working through several options sequentially, but you can change these a lot. Prism, color or a texture. And you'll see essentially you can get very different structures out of it as you're kind of messing with the colors and the settings. Okay, so this is kind of for fun, but it's what I call the sort of radiolara generator. If you're kind of familiar with that sort of biological aspect of things, that's what this does. Okay, so this is just an example file to show you what's possible, provided you're kind of at least initially working with some of the standard components. But as you kind of mix and match a lot of different things, then it can actually help you a lot to kind of do a lot of different variations of things. In particular, this point attractor is actually used to kind of control a differential thickness. So in this case, right, the thickness of this unit is kind of lower here, but then the thickness of the members here are much higher, right? So you can actually have different thicknesses within the sort of same offset structure, and that's what this portion is actually trying to do with the Weaverbird thicken a component. Okay, so there's these are different variations. All right, so that's it. The next 2 weeks we'll actually kind of start to see how Weaverbird and the way it deals with these sort of mesh topological editing can help us work with Kangaroo here, which is this, and its physics simulation.